Jefferson would be appropriate for time around the Memorial Day. And so Thomas Jefferson has always been sort of a hero of mine. In fact, I had this engraving hanging in my office for many years. So I thought, well, I can do something there. And we know where roads paved with good intentions often lead. But in this case, it sort of led me to a parking lot, sort of driving around. Because when you start thinking about Jefferson, it's pretty hard to figure out where to stop. There's just so much that you could pursue. And so I've kind of settled on a particular thing. One, I want to talk about a bit of what Jefferson thought. I want to talk a bit about Jefferson's times, and then kind of, in the end, take a look at Jefferson's Bible that I suspect that many of you are familiar with, and I know at least one person brought their own copy today. Now let me start with a little aside, I suppose. Some years ago, I was involved in some litigation having to do with technology that had a part in developing for a company down in Mississippi. And the principal on the other side was being represented by an entertainment lawyer from California. And this lawyer didn't do a very good job of concealing the fact that he thought that he was going to be able to demonstrate to Mississippians how law should be practiced, And so we went down to Greenville, Mississippi for a pretrial hearing of sorts. And the judge's clerk told us that the judge wanted to talk with one side first and then the other. And so he called in the other side. And after a while, got the group that I was part of and escorted us into the judge's chambers. So the first thing I noticed was this larger-than-life-size portrait of Thomas Jefferson right behind the judge's desk. Now, it was larger than life-size compared to the judge, who was about this tall. And he had a big bow tie and a seersucker suit. And I didn't know whether he kind of thought of himself as Jefferson and fancied the summer dress of William Faulkner or the other way around. It was kind of confusing. He could have just attended the University of Virginia. I don't know. But the first comment he made was, well, who's paying for the fancy California lawyers? So I thought, well, okay, my side's in pretty good shape here. And we were. We were, as it turned out. But at the time, I had this kind of complex response to those circumstances, and from time to time, I think about that. I mean, here we have these kind of attitudes and vanities and opinions, and that coupled together with this very prominent display of one of my heroes. So it's a complex thing. Difficult to think about clearly, and kind of got a number of slippery notions embedded in there. And then I came kind of to believe that, okay, that's a little bit like Jefferson, because when you start thinking about Jefferson, it's complex and contradictory and slippery. And maybe that's the way it is with everything that's worth thinking about and everything that's interesting or things that are important. So then maybe that's part of the point that Jefferson, there are subtleties, contradictions, complexities, all sorts of things that are hard to settle on. So I want to kind of start with a few expressions of his ideas. I'll do a lot of quoting here. And these ideas are, let's see, I didn't think exactly how I want to say this. Well, I did, but what I want to, I'm not trying to advocate for these ideas. We want to think about Jefferson and his ideas and his times and find it within that something that might be useful to us as a model. Now, Jefferson did a lot of his thinking in public. He was in the public eye. So therefore, he had to hone his views to a much sharper edge than most of us do. In fact, we can be sloppy nobody knows it. Maybe we don't even know it, you know. We just don't, we're not forced to be as clear about things. But he lived in conflicting time, you know, times of conflicting ideas, aims, aspirations, and he was complicated and conflicted and contradictory sometimes in his own ideas and aims. And so are we, you know. His times were what they were, our times are what they are. We're here in our times, and we're confronted in many ways with similar difficulties and the same opportunity to invest in thinking and to sort out what it is we think. Now, excuse me. This notion of investing in thinking is something I'd like to emphasize a bit from time to time. Jefferson was born in 1843. So that means that he was only 33 when he composed the Declaration. Is better? What did I say? 1743. See, everybody knows what I'm talking about but me. So he was only 33 when he composed the Declaration of Independence. Now, the fact that he was asked to do that, I think, is a measure of a life up to that point of invested thinking and developed ideas. And so most of us, speaking for myself, maybe I shouldn't say most, but by 33, you know, I was still worrying about, I reckon, tenure. I think I had all my kids out of diapers by then, you know. But Jefferson was composing the Declaration of Independence. So I think that's a measure of the esteem that he had earned by that age, and he'd earned it by his thinking and his thoughts. And he had many years ahead of him at that time. Now, Jefferson was many things, but occasionally he was way off the mark. He commented in 1826, this was after he had left the presidency, so this is a good time later in his life. He said, "I rejoice that in this blessed country of free inquiry and belief, which has surrendered its conscience to neither kings nor priests, the genuine doctrine of only one God is reviving. And I trust that there is not a young man now living in the United States who will not die a Unitarian." We know how that worked out, right? So he missed it on occasion. In my opinion, Jefferson was kind of part and product of the Enlightenment. In all matters, I think he aspired to reason. He was a rationalist. And if we accept as a definition of belief, a belief is holding a conjecture to be true, I think he was kind of belief-free. You know, he didn't take conjecture at face value, and he was devoted to trying to make sense of things. I think there's an element of faith, however, that he shared with Washington, Adams, Franklin, the deists of the time. And he believed that there was a reality in progress, in continuous march of progress and improvement in civilization and in humankind. So he had this faith that we were moving along. Perhaps he had evidence, but I'm not sure what we can say about that. Now, a point about his thoughts. In 1788, now he was then 45, he declined to act as a godfather for the child of a friend, and he said, from an early part of my life, he'd been unable to accept the concept or the doctrine of the Trinity. So this sense now that of Unitarianism, and I'll use that with a lowercase u. You know, he had been a Unitarian for quite a long time, even though his ideas were still evolving. And at various points in his life, he opined further. He said, History, I believe, furnishes no example of a priest-ridden people maintaining a free civil government. That was in 1813. He said, in every country and in every age, the priest has been hostile to liberty. He is always in alliance with the despot, abetting his abuses in return for protection to his own. When I was kind of typing this in, I thought I sort of heard the echoes of Bob Snellsire talking about college deans. But some of you have heard him talk about that. He called Calvinism a blasphemous absurdity. He wrote to John Adams. This was in 1823. Now, he ran against John Adams in a bitter campaign in 1820. It was 1823, so they're patching up things, and he's writing to John Adams about Calvin. He says his religion was demonism. If ever a man worshipped a false god, he did. The being described in his 5 points as a demon of malignant spirit. It would be more pardonable to believe in no God at all than to blaspheme him by the atrocious attributes of Calvin. So he was not a Calvinist. I'll come back to that in a second. Now in a minute, I'm going to indulge in a couple of lengthy quotes. I feel like the length of them is justified by the fact that reading the whole thing helps out a little bit. But also, these quotes just ought to be read from time to time. So I'll read them today. Thomas Paine published Common Sense in January of 1776. Now, we all know the importance of common sense in our history. But it's a remarkable thing about that I'll mention. They published 100,000 copies by March, and then ultimately 500,000 copies of Common Sense were published in the colonies. And our population at that time was only 3 million total. And so there's a very sizable fraction of the population at that time had access to common sense. You know, a sixth of them could have owned a copy. So it's pretty remarkable in the widespread distribution and what it did. These lines appeared in it. And I'm going to quote maybe a little past the best known part, but as I said, I think some of these things are worth reading just to be reading them. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has the right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. And if being bound in that manner is not slavery, then is there not such a thing as slavery upon earth? Even the expression is impious, for so unlimited a power can belong only to God. That was Thomas Paine. I love that, so I read it. Now, those were words that stirred men's souls. The times tried men's souls, those words stirred men's souls. In 1776. In 1793, Thomas Paine wrote The Age of Reason, and it ruined him. He never recovered from that, really, and it's kind of a complex and interesting story, but here is a little bit from The Age of Reason. He says, when I am told that the Quran was written in heaven and brought to Muhammad by an angel, the account comes too near the same kind of hearsay evidence and second-hand authority as the former. He's referring to Moses and the Ten Commandments here. I did not see the angel myself, and therefore have a right not to believe it. When also I am told that a woman called the Virgin Mary said, or gave out, that she was with child, without any cohabitation with a man, and that her betrothed husband Joseph said that an angel told him so, I have a right to believe them or not. Such a circumstance required a much stronger evidence than their bare word for it. But we have not even this, for neither Joseph nor Mary wrote any such matter themselves. It is only reported by others that they said so. It is hearsay upon hearsay, and I do not choose to rest my belief upon such evidence. Okay. Point is that the Times, Jefferson's Times during this period, included the time when Paine wrote Common Sense and when he wrote The Age of Reason. And Thomas Jefferson had that as a model to influence his thinking. In the election of 1800, when Jefferson ran against John Adams, a New England newspaper wrote this. He said, should the infidel Jefferson be elected to the presidency, the seal of death is that moment set upon our holy religion. Our churches will be prostrated, and some infamous prostitute under the title of the Goddess of Reason will preside in the sanctuaries now devoted to the worship of the Most High. So here's Jefferson now. He's doing his thinking, and he's writing and he's speaking. I mean, it's interesting. I'll mention Jefferson only wrote one book, one thing for publication. Everything else we have is in public documents or correspondence, or has been reported by others. So he didn't leave a vast body of lengthy written descriptions of his thoughts, and so these things. But he's understood. So he's in this period of time when the ice is thin, depending upon what you think about what. The Federalists call him a howling atheist and an infidel. Although his views were shared by many others, including some of the Federalists and a number of the founding fathers, Adams, and that he actually ran against. And one commenter at the time said, it's hard to say which surpassed the other in boiling hatred of Calvinism, Jefferson or Adams. And so he's running against Adams. Adams' side is accusing him of being an infidel, but the two of them shared the same thoughts. There's a modern parallel there, I believe. There was a prominent Presbyterian minister who was a supporter of Jefferson. So he said this. It has a nice little summary at the end. It said, because Mr. Jefferson is suspected of deism, are we to raise a hue and cry against him, as if he ought to be instantly deprived of his rights of citizenship? If he be an infidel, I lament it for two reasons: for a concern for his own personal salvation, and that a religion which is so much spoke against does not receive his countenance and aid. But notwithstanding this, I think myself perfectly consistent in saying that I had much rather have Mr. Jefferson President of the United States than an aristocratic Christian. So in a sense, he's saying even the devil over blue bloods, So that's another element of the times there. So we have the example of Paine, wonderful success, just life-changing criticism as a consequence of things he wrote. Jefferson had that example. Jefferson had the experience of the campaign of 1800, where he was considered an infidel and was a howling atheist and so forth, So he had those experiences. So it seems to me that kind of drove him after that time to a little bit more private expressions of his thinking. He often wrote letters and things and requested the recipient to hold the matter private or destroy the document later on. But he's not secretive about it. I mean, he corresponded with very many people, but he seemed to be driven, to me at least, seems to be driven a little bit more inward in his ruminations, and particularly things about morals, ethics, and religion. Now, everybody has lists of favorite books, and I have a list of books that I wish I'd read 20 years before I did, And a book that would certainly be on that list is Enlightenment in America by Henry May. And so I would recommend that. It's a little academic. I mean, it's not a breezy read, but it does describe the transition and the history of things from the Jefferson's time through later years. And Henry May describes what he describes as clusters of ideas clustered around Calvinism and ideas clustered around the Enlightenment, and this never-ending tension between the two. And it would seem that kind of New England Protestantism prevailed to a large degree in that contest, and sometimes kind of perversely, oddly. Sinclair Lewis noted much more recently, he said, when fascism comes to this country, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross. And I think, we could probably even make a course out of that here at the fellowship if we chose to. In fact, it'd be very interesting to track through that book of May. Now, to his Bible. The copy I have of Jefferson's Bible is this paperback here. And his views, although he didn't formally join a Unitarian church, that some of which were in existence in his lifetime, he continued to support Episcopal church. His views were clearly Unitarian with a lowercase u, and I would say deism. But he had a lifelong esteem for Jesus' moral teachings. He didn't believe in either miracles or the divinity of Jesus as detailed in the Bible and is held, by Christians of that time or at any time for that matter. He wrote to Thomas Pickering, this is 1821, no one sees with greater pleasure than myself the progress of reason in its advances toward rational Christianity. And he wrote, we shall have done away with the incomprehensible jargon of Trinitarian arithmetic, that 3 are 1 and 1 is 3, and so forth. So he's anticipating the future here, and that's given him that view, I think, that everyone is going to, by now, be a Unitarian. And those comments came shortly after he had compiled this Jefferson Bible. And in it, he refers to Christianity as the most sublime and benevolent code of morals which has ever been offered to man. So that's his view of Christianity. But the Christianity that he's thinking about is the one that's represented in this Bible. The title that he gave it is The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, extracted textually from the Gospels in Greek, Latin, French, and English. And everyone knows the story, at least part of it, I suppose, but he assembled it by literally taking a razor and slicing up these Bibles and pasting them, the comparable passages together on paper in the 4 languages. Now, he eliminated all references to supernatural events, miracles, and the like. He distilled it to what he considered to be the philosophical essence of Jesus' teaching. And it's interesting he did this as sort of a private exercise now. So he's, as I said earlier on, he invested thinking. And he's working. This is later in his life. Now, he started work on this in 1804. He had just become president of the United States, and he didn't finish it up until about 1820 or 1819, I believe. So he was at this for quite a while. And so it represents a sustained effort, a period of development, a time when he's figuring out things and he's trying to figure out the Bible, and he's doing this privately. And he has his clippings all bound in a book, but it's a private thing. And he corresponds with a number of people about this exercise, including Adams and some others. And it was not long after his death, 1895, that the thing was actually published. And then in 1904, it was published by Congress, and copies were given to every incoming member of Congress until the copies ran out. Now, one of the people who got one of the copies was Frank Church, who was a senator from Idaho, who was a Unitarian. And he gave the copy to his son, F. Forrester Church, and many of you recognize that name. He's a luminary of our faith. He died some years ago. And if you're interested, you can download this thing for 99 cents to your Kindle, and you can get a paperback copy for $3.75. But if you get one, be sure to get one that has the introduction by F. Forrester Church, because I think since we're Unitarians and he's a Unitarian and he describes many things, it's very enlightening. In fact, I suspect that you might not manage to read the whole thing, but I encourage you to read the introduction there. It's very, very good. Now, there's a website. It's The Humanist, all one word with no spaces, thehumanist.com. And a fellow, Peter Carlson, has posted there a very, very interesting and good account of the Bible and its interpretation, that sort of thing. So I would recommend that to you as well. Now, several writers referred to Jefferson's audacity in slicing up the Bible and arranging it to his own purposes. Others considered that a heresy, it's a heretical act. People do it even now. And some modern worshipers of our founding fathers, find this Bible inconvenient to their own notions of virtue and tend to ignore it. It's one of the things that, depending on your point of view, you might pretend it's not there. There are other points of view as well. One modern writer, Garrett Ward Sheldon, of University of Virginia, I mention that because of the Jefferson connection. He said, in Jefferson there's a lack. I really think it's a learning disability, a lack of understanding about spirituality. He was a brilliant man, but he was very practical, very scientific. He just didn't get spirituality. And I'm pretty sure I suffer that same disability, But so you get all kinds of opinions about this. But I think it's relevant that it was a private exercise. And he did it to get him closer to truth, So that's what we're after, truth. And if we, again, can accept the notion that a belief is holding some conjecture to be true without evidence, then I think Jefferson considered the Bible to be a deeply flawed thing. And so if we accept that, I'm not sure it was audacious at all. It was probably just a reasonable, rational, effective way of getting at the truth. Just whacking away what you don't like, or what seems not to fit, I should say, and seeing what's left. And maybe it's an 18th century application of Occam's 13th century razor, simplify things. And Jefferson literally used a razor to do that. So how's all this offer a model for us? I hope I can make this clear. Jefferson lived in a time of conflicting and competing ideas, aims, and aspirations. We live in such times. All times are such. He encountered complex circumstances when presented with numerous and varied opportunities. So are we. Scale is no matter. We haven't been asked to compose the Declaration of Independence. But so what? Our days are just as long as Jefferson's and afford the same 24 hours for us to work on what we're thinking. Jefferson invested conscientious thinking. He invested thinking. He invested thinking because it paid dividends. He was devoted to finding the truth. So should we be, devoted to finding the truth. His efforts, sustained over a lifetime, enabled him to think what he thought and do what he did. It's sustained over a lifetime. We should be so tenacious. Jefferson took a razor to the Bible to expose its truth. We should be as bold or so practical in seeking the truth. And in that, I think he's an example for us, much to be emulated. closing